when it comes to the DCU that James Gunn is trying to put together, the most obvious first question is always going to be, what the hell happened with Henry Cavill? You know? And we don't really know. Because, you know, it's obviously he's contradicted himself again that, well, I needed a younger Superman. Now he's saying that he didn't need a younger Superman. I just needed a Superman. And considering there's only 10 years between the two actors, with David Cornsweet being cast in the role. So immediately I just assumed, well, Henry costs too much. That has to be the deal. And I still think, in a lot of ways, that's probably the deal. And that's where Zaslav is ultimately the deciding factor. It would be better to just start over and get a new, younger cast that won't cost as much. And so there you go. And there's a lot to be said for that, especially with a company in trouble like Warner Brothers is. And I assume his ultimate goal is to polish it up good enough to sell it to whomever. I mean, recently, apparently, those ideas that Apple could buy Disney doesn't seem to be on the table anymore. But maybe Warner Brothers, you know, or certain properties that they want that IP for their own entertainment venues that they're pursuing. And so, well, there you go. There's a plan of sorts. But again, you have a damaged property here, and you keep stumbling around. But then again, there is that interview that Ben Affleck gave, which contradicted James Gunn pretty early on, where he said they wanted Ben Affleck to direct, and the assumption, it was never really stated, that he would be the director for their Batman movie. And Ben Affleck's response to this was that he had no interest in what James Gunn was trying to do with the DC universe. He's a fine guy. I'm sure he'll do a good job. I'm just not interested in what he's trying to do. So that's somewhat telling in what exactly is the Gunn vision. Now, of course, Gunn is seen largely as the comedy guy, and there's a lot of truth to that, and certainly his approach to Guardians of the Galaxy and then Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, very much that. That's not going to go over well in everything, which is why I was hoping he would be more of an overseer and manager. Sure, there would be films that he would be perfect to direct. Probably a Lobo film, he could easily do that. His interest in the Authority, which I think should be shuffled off to be an Elseworlds movie. It doesn't belong in the DC universe. Even though they keep trying to force it into it, it never works. But nevertheless, that's one he could probably tackle. But Superman, I think he needed to be an eye for talent and could bring someone in to do that. But he didn't. So if this is going to be a silly movie and really stupid in a lot of ways, and it might actually be funny, but I just don't think that's going to go over well. Certainly not with the DC fan base, which is slightly different than the Marvel one. And could that have been another factor when they met with Henry Cavill? I suppose. And then they parted company on that, you know, and he says, yeah, I don't want to do that. You know, it could be, which I don't know why. I mean, Affleck just flat out says it for the most part, I guess. But Henry Cavill is a guy who always kept things close to the vest. And that's just the way it is. And, you know, I mean, you talk about James Gunn steps up to the plate and he responds to people on Twitter and everything. But if he was really gutsy, he'd just tell the truth. Because he clearly has it. I mean, this is too contradictory about the age of Superman being the deciding factor for his creative vision. So it's a creative decision, and the script he had in mind that he wrote, Henry's just not the right age for it. Which, I mean, Henry's in great shape. I think he could have done it. And again, David Cornsweet is younger, and it's 10 years younger. But I mean, Henry is, again, in really great shape. And there's a lot of other factors. He wants to do this father and son take on Batman with Bruce Wayne and Damian Wayne and all that. And I'm like, well, then that puts him in an older age, and so Henry would fit in as the Superman of that type of world. And of course, coming out of Zack Snyder's Justice League, Lois is pregnant with their child, so there you go. Then both Superman and Batman are fathers now, which is the way it is in the comics at the moment. So none of that really fits at all of what it was. So creatively, it could have been a creative difference between the two there. Cavill doesn't want to do a silly Superman movie, but Gunn does. And Wise says, well, all right, we'll part on that. But probably more to the fact of, hey, we can do this cheaper. And that's really got to perk up Zaslav's ears. He wants to polish these properties up and prepare them for sale, but it's got to be done on the cheap. And it is possible to do. One of the aspects of the Shazam movie was how cheap that was done, which is why it didn't lose money, even though it wasn't a big hit. But it looked okay. It looked pretty good. And so there's ways to do this. And the Blue Beetle movie, they didn't spend a lot of money on, but I thought the effects looked perfectly fine for that. So there's ways to get around there and do this sort of thing and make a pretty entertaining film. So I guess Cavill was too pricey, and there may also be a difference of ideas that they couldn't come together on, because that does follow Cavill around. I mean, that's what ended his tenure on The Witcher, much to The Witcher's dismay, to their detriment, rather. And we're seeing that now. And you might see a similar thing here. Now, granted, it's the scenario and how it played out, where you had an interim group running the DC films with DeLuca and Abdi, and they seem to be, I think it was pretty much confirmed that they wanted Henry Cavill back as Superman, and they were going to continue on with the cast. They already had him in place. Let's just polish up the ideas and move forward. And the axe came down when Zaslav puts Gunn in there. Was it totally Gunn's decision? I just don't think it was. And especially since he can't seem to keep it straight for what the reasons are for these decisions. So, and they just don't want to admit that, well, it's the money and we're struggling, and, So, it's unfortunate. But I think you just come back to mainly that. And possibly, yes, there was also a disagreement on what the direction of a Superman film should be. And that would have been very important to Henry Cavill, as evidenced by the way he was about Witcher and all that, which in a lot of ways would be a plus. I can think of a couple of stories. Of course, Witcher, where it appears Henry was right about that they should have been more loyal to the source material. And then Mark Hamill about Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. Seems like Mark was right and Rian Johnson was wrong. But whatever the case may be, and probably there's still, even though bosses have changed at Warner Brothers, there's still a lot of people who've been there all along and may have an axe to grind against the guy. They wanted him to do cameos in their DC films. He didn't show up for Shazam and stuff like that, and that might have put some noses out of joint about him holding out for a full-on Superman deal rather than just doing a few scenes here and there. So it may be a combination of them all, I suppose. But we just don't know, and they'll never really say it, I guess, and that's part of the problem as well, considering how bizarre and clumsy everything appears to be. Now, it is true, a lot of the failures of the final films of the DCEU is not entirely the fault of Gunn, Safran, or even Zaslav, but they do bear some of the responsibility. They're in charge of how they're being rolled out. They're in charge of how they promoted them, and they're in charge of telling everybody they're dead-end films. You know, and of course they don't bear any responsibility for how it all got here. Plenty of villains there, not theirs, but damn, could you at least learn the lessons? I guess not. And going forward, there's only a handful of things I've heard Gunn talk about what his DCU might be that I think look and sound pretty good. I'm not all that displeased with the casting of David Cornsweet. He certainly has the look, and he might do very well, and I hope he does. But there's all kinds of troubling signs here and there, especially that business of the Authority being involved in it. I don't care for that. And certainly the name Tom King keeps coming up. I mean, if that's just because they have to put up with him because his mommy's on the board, then so be it. But don't let him have any real creative power over the direction of the characters. And it's just all fluff where Gunn keeps praising the guy online and stuff like that. Because, well, he's got to be a cheerleader for DC now. You know. But right now, as it is, and a lot of this is on James Gunn putting himself in that position, unless you'd say, well, Zaslav forced him into it. However, whatever stuff he thought they could do, and suddenly the rug's pulled out from under him, they got to change gears and try this. It could very well be that situation because the numbers coming in, so Zaslav's got to change his mind again about what can we do to get this even cheaper and spruce this up so I can sell it. Could very well be the deal. And Gunn is just at the mercy of circumstances he cannot control. But however, Superman Legacy probably has to be the best damn movie he's ever done. Is that likely? I'm dubious, but I hope it is.